I never thought grilling ribs could spark a war, but the HOA had other plans. One warning turned into 5, then 10. They said my BBQs were a public nuisance. What they didn't realize? I'm not just some guy with a smoker. I'm a legend in the Pitmaster world. I moved into this neighborhood 5 years ago. Quiet place, well-kept lawns. Folks waved when they walked by. I followed every rule in the book, paid my dues on time, trimmed the hedges just right, even helped organize a few block parties. But the moment I fired up my smoker and brought out the brisket, everything changed. What started as a simple weekend tradition, good food, close friends, and a little blues guitar in the background, suddenly became public enemy number one. The HOA sent me a notice. Excessive gatherings, offensive smoke, disturbance of peace. Then came the fines, one after another, like clockwork. At first I thought it was a misunderstanding, but then I realized it wasn't about rules, it was personal. They had no clue who they were messing with, because I wasn't just some backyard hobbyist. I'd won national competitions, been featured on Food Network, and cooked for governors. And the HOA president? She was about to find out the hard way. The first fine was almost laughable, $50 for unauthorized smoke emissions. I thought maybe someone had complained by mistake, maybe a new neighbor unfamiliar with how Saturday afternoons smell when mesquite wood hits hot coals. I paid it, shook it off, and fired up the grill again the next weekend. Then came the $200 ticket for excessive noise. That one stung. It was for a local blues guitarist, just a guy with an old Fender and a love for BB King. He wasn't even plugged into an amp. Played for 2 hours as the sun went down, while we passed around ribs and cornbread under string lights. I remember laughing with a guest about the irony, how peaceful it all felt, how grounded. That fine made it clear. This wasn't about noise or smoke. It was about control. Things escalated fast after that. One evening I noticed a soft buzzing sound overhead. Looked up and sure enough, there it was. A drone, hovering above my backyard like some nosy hawk. At first I thought it belonged to one of the neighborhood kids. But when it returned the next weekend, this time during a quiet family dinner, I knew it wasn't innocent. A week later, the HOA emailed me high-resolution photos of my backyard setup. They said I was in violation for exceeding the temporary structure limit because I'd put up a canopy over the smoker to shield it from rain. That's when I realized this wasn't just bureaucracy, it was surveillance, harassment, plain and simple. I tried reaching out to the board. No response. I sent emails, made phone calls, even offered to meet and explain that these BBQs weren't just casual cookouts, they were my life's work. I've been smoking meat since I was 12. I've competed in Memphis, Kansas City, Austin. I once cooked for a White House event, for God's sake. But none of that seemed to matter here. In this neighborhood, the only title that counted was HOA president, and her name was Karen. Of course. The next time I saw her, she wasn't at a meeting or behind a desk. She was standing behind my 6-foot fence, clutching a clipboard and a measuring tape. I walked out and asked if she needed help. She didn't even blink, just said, "Your smoker is within 2 feet of a shared property line. That violates subsection 9B of the HOA safety code." She wasn't even pretending to be fair anymore. Then came the letter, formal, aggressive, and dripping with legal threats. If I didn't cancel my annual SmokeFest Sunday, the HOA would pursue legal action. Said it posed logistical concerns, security risks, and unsanctioned neighborhood disruption. That was the moment everything changed. See, SmokeFest isn't just a party, it's a tradition, a gathering of pitmasters, old friends, community food lovers. I donate the proceeds to a local veterans shelter. Last year, we fed over 300 people and raised nearly $10,000. The idea that this woman, who'd never spoken to me face-to-face outside of a warning notice, could take that away lit a fire under me hotter than my Texas chili rub. It wasn't just about meat anymore. It was about dignity, about standing up to people who think power is a weapon to be used, not a responsibility to be respected. And here's what Karen didn't know. While she was busy counting grill legs and measuring smoke trails, I'd been busy too. Behind the scenes, I'd quietly bought out rental homes in the neighborhood, 16 of them to be exact. Over the years, as landlords looked to sell, I made offers through a holding company. Never made noise about it. Just saw an opportunity and took it. By the time Karen sent that threat, I wasn't just a homeowner. I was the largest property stakeholder in the entire HOA. And I had something else. Receipts. Literal receipts. I'd been documenting every violation, every overstep, every drone flyby. I had timestamps, statements, and a solid case that the HOA leadership had been selectively enforcing rules, especially when it came to me. But I wasn't going to fight them with lawyers, not yet. First, I needed to show them what they were really up against. I needed a moment, not just to defend my right to grill, but to make a statement that echoed louder than any smoker ever could. SmokeFest was back on, bigger than ever. And the HOA, they were about to learn that when you push the wrong pitmaster, you don't just get burned. You get smoked. Karen thought she was in control. She thought her clipboard and her carefully manicured rules gave her dominion over every yard, every driveway, every charcoal ember in this neighborhood. She thought people like me, quiet, respectful, laid back, were easy targets. The kind of guy who'd rather pay a fine than start a fight. What she didn't know is that I've never started a fight in my life, but I've sure as hell finished a few. While Karen spent her time obsessing over grill placement and sniffing the air like a bloodhound for unauthorized smoke, I had been busy playing a much longer, quieter game. See, 2 years ago, I noticed something. A handful of homes on our block were going up for rent. Landlords were moving on. Older residents were downsizing. I started making discreet inquiries, putting in fair offers, and acquiring property after property, never using my name directly, always through my LLC. One house, then two, then four. 6 months later, I had 8. By the end of last year, I had 16. That's 16 out of the 56 properties governed by this HOA. Legally speaking, that made me the largest voting stakeholder on the board, a fact I kept very, very quiet. Why? Because you never show your cards while the other side is still bluffing. And while I was building my quiet empire, I had something else brewing, my audience. Being a pitmaster isn't just about the smoke and fire. It's about community, about bringing people together, online and offline. And over the years, my social media following had grown from a few friends sharing rib tips to over 1.2 million people across platforms. Die-hard BBQ lovers, backyard chefs, small business owners, foodies, and fans from every corner of the country. When Karen sent that final threat, demanding I cancel SmokeFest, I didn't just get mad. I went live. I shared my story with my audience. No names, no doxing, no drama, just the facts. I told them how an HOA was trying to shut down a charity BBQ event that raised money for veterans and supported local small businesses. I told them how I'd been fined, surveilled, harassed, for nothing more than sharing food and joy. And the internet, it lit up. Thousands of comments flooded in. Emails poured into the HOA inbox, most of them furious, many from people who had once lived under HOAs just like this one. Food bloggers picked up the story. A few local news stations reached out. And then the cherry on top, a protest organized by a local food truck association who showed up in solidarity. Not with pitchforks, but with pulled pork and brisket sliders. Karen tried to act like it was just noise. A social media stunt, she called it. But I knew something she didn't. While she was focused on silencing me with outdated rules, I'd been doing a little digging of my own. Homeowners associations are supposed to be democratic. Any change to the bylaws requires a formal vote, with proper notice to all homeowners. But over the past year, Karen had been, shall we say, creative. She'd pushed through amendments without full board votes, sometimes using email-only decisions, sometimes interpreting older rules to mean something new. Lucky for me, I had all the records. Emails, memos, meeting minutes. And a buddy of mine, real estate attorney out of Dallas, helped me put together a file thicker than a brisket flat. When I dropped that binder onto the table at the next HOA board meeting, the room went dead silent. I looked Karen straight in the eyes and said, "You've been enforcing illegal amendments for over a year. You've overstepped your authority. And by the way, as the largest stakeholder, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence." You ever seen a person go pale and red at the same time? That's what happened next, she tried to object. Claimed I was bluffing, that I didn't have the votes. But then I handed out copies of the property deeds, 16 of them, signed, stamped, notarized. That's when the rest of the board started shifting in their seats. And here's the best part. The same followers who lit up my inbox, a bunch of them lived right here in town. 2 were renters in homes I owned. 1 was a small business owner who'd been fined by the HOA the year before for putting a tiny BBQ Friday chalkboard on her lawn. Turns out Karen hadn't just messed with me. She'd built a list of enemies long before I ever fired up the smoker. She'd built a list of enemies long before I ever fired up the smoker. She wanted fire. I brought the whole pit, and now the heat was just getting started. The meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m., but I got there 15 minutes early, out of habit, not nerves. I wasn't there to argue anymore. I was there to finish it. In one hand, I carried a tray of slow-smoked ribs, still warm from the pit. In the other, a thick manila envelope packed with signed deeds, legal documents, and a notarized motion that would flip the entire HOA leadership on its head. I didn't dress up, just jeans, boots, and the same Pitmaster jacket I wear when I'm in competition mode. If Karen was going to see me for who I really was, then I'd make sure she saw every stitch of it. The boardroom was filled with the usual faces, tight smiles, stiff backs, a tension in the air so thick you could cut it with a carving knife. Karen was seated at the center, flanked by her loyalists. Her arms were crossed, expression smug, like she thought this was just another meeting where she'd steamroll the agenda and silence anyone who spoke against her. She didn't know it yet, but her reign was over. I walked straight to the front, nodded politely to the board, and set the tray of ribs on the table. Thought I'd bring something for everyone, I said. Figured this meeting might get spicy. A few people chuckled. Karen didn't. Her eyes narrowed. This is highly inappropriate, she snapped. This is a formal meeting, not a cookout. I didn't miss a beat. You're right, I said, placing the manila envelope beside the ribs, which is why I also brought this. She frowned as I opened it and began laying out the documents, one by one on the table. Property deeds, voting rights, the formal motion to remove her as president, and last, the compiled evidence of her unauthorized rule changes and mismanagement. 16 properties, I said calmly. That gives me the largest voting stake in the HOA. And these documents, I tapped the stack, prove multiple violations of HOA bylaws carried out under your leadership without proper process. She laughed, sharp and dismissive. You can't just walk in here with paperwork and demand a coup. I leaned in slightly. Karen, you fined me for the smell of hickory wood. You sent drones over my backyard. You tried to cancel a charity BBQ event for veterans, all while bypassing due process and intimidating residents. This isn't a coup. It's a reckoning. One of the board members, an older gentleman named Tom, who'd always stayed quiet at meetings, finally spoke. Is this true, Karen? Were these amendments passed without full votes? Karen's face faltered. They were necessary. The board was dragging its feet. Someone had to act. That someone didn't have the authority, Tom said flatly. The room turned. Eyes shifted. Loyalty cracked like the bark on a brisket done just right. I pulled out one final sheet of paper, the motion for her removal, with signatures from enough property owners to trigger an emergency vote. I looked her dead in the eyes. You have 2 choices. Sign the resignation letter and step down peacefully, or we move forward with a full legal review. And I promise you, every homeowner here will see every line of what's in this folder. Her lips parted, ready to bark back, but nothing came out. Not this time. She stared at the papers, at the signatures, at the board members who once backed her now leaning away in silence. Then without a word she stood, snatched her bag off the floor, and stormed out of the room. No goodbye, no speech, just the sound of her heels clicking down the hallway, fast and furious. I exhaled, not from relief, but from resolve. It was done. The queen had fallen. The rest happened quickly. The board dissolved her presidency that very night. A special vote confirmed her removal, and with my stake and support from other homeowners, I was voted in as interim president until the next election cycle. And those fines? Every single one of them, voided with formal apologies attached. The BBQ restrictions? Gone. In their place, we drafted a new community charter that celebrated local culture, food, and togetherness. Not everyone had to like my ribs, but no one would be punished for community spirit again. As for SmokeFest Sunday, it became an official HOA-endorsed neighborhood event. We put it on the calendar, created a committee, and invited local vendors to set up booths. That year, attendance doubled. Families brought lawn chairs and coolers. Kids ran around with sauce on their cheeks. A jazz band played well into the evening. Even Tom brought his own homemade baked beans. I didn't make a speech that day. I didn't need to. I just stood behind my smoker, tongs in one hand, a towel over my shoulder, watching smoke curl into the evening sky as neighbors lined up for another round of brisket. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But mine came hot off the pit, wrapped in butcher paper and seasoned with justice. You'd think that'd be the end of it, right? Karen humiliated, the neighborhood free to breathe in hickory smoke without fear, and SmokeFest locked in as a yearly tradition. I thought so too, until about a week later. I was at the county permit office, handling some paperwork for a new outdoor kitchen expansion, when I saw her, Karen, standing in the corner near the planning desk, whispering to a city inspector like they were conspiring in a spy novel. She caught my eye, smiled that fake smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and turned her back like nothing had happened. Now I don't believe in coincidences, not in BBQ, and definitely not when it comes to someone like her. Whatever she's cooking up, it's not ribs. So if you think this fire's out, think again. Something tells me the smoke's just starting to rise. If you want to find out what she's planning next, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your craziest HOA story in the comments. Because next time, I might be showing up to your backyard. And remember, revenge, it's always best served smoked.